All right guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about these, and specifically the wheel setup, the tire setup, how I fit these 285, 75, 17, which is technically a 34-inch tire, and in my opinion is probably the best tire size for a 3rd gen Tacoma, and possibly even the 5th gen 4Runners as well. So why I say this is probably the best tire size for a 3rd gen Tacoma, it's right before going full bonkers and full ludicrous mode with a full 35-inch tire, which involves a crap ton of cutting, trimming, other potential mods as well, a lot of unnecessary weight for the truck. And why this is better than a 33-inch tire is it's going to look bigger on the truck. And these 34-inch tires often get mistaken, or I do get questions, hey, are you running a 35-inch tire? My response is no, it's a 285, 75, 17. So there's two key terms that I also want to describe, and just make sure that you have a good understanding, because we're going to be mentioning them quite a bit in this video, and that is caster and offset. So caster is going to refer to the alignment, oftentimes with aftermarket upper control arms. Example, SPC, Dobinson's, a lot of them will mention on their website of having a positive or neutral caster, or the adjustability to adjust the caster in the upper control arm. And when it comes to fitting larger tires, that is something that you want to start to pay attention to. When we talk about caster, and specifically a positive caster for the upper control arm, that is essentially moving the wheel forward, whereas a neutral caster would be obviously in line, and then if you have a negative, it's going to be pushing it back, which you wouldn't want in this situation. So when looking for upper control arms specifically, or even just, trying to understand how you're going to start fitting these bigger tires, look for an upper control arm that is having a positive caster, because that positive caster is going to start moving that wheel, that larger tire and wheel, away from the cab mount and the back of this inner wheel well area to help with tire clearance. The only issue is once you start maxing out that caster from whatever upper control arm, some are set, some are adjustable, then you're gonna have to start worrying about the front portion of the plastic here, which could lead to having to do something like a Viper cut on your Tacoma, your 5th gen 4Runner, just because with that positive caster moving it all the way forward, there's going to be a high chance that you're going to start rubbing just at full flex, turning into parking lots, hitting speed bumps, whatever it may be, on that front plastic portion. Now, if you have an aftermarket bumper, if you've already done a Viper cut, most likely you're going to be completely fine. But that is the brief meaning of what having caster is. Now, if we're talking about wheel offset, that is something else that you're going to want to start to pay attention to, especially when fitting the larger or bigger tires. So when we are looking at a negative offset, imagine the tire is sticking out further away from the vehicle, okay? So it's pushing that rim or that wheel further out away to help with clearance of any components inside the wheel well. So for example, especially the upper control arm, once you start going with a wider tire than stock, there's really good chance that you're going to start rubbing on that upper control arm. So that's why people often have to do a negative offset to push that wheel or that tire out further. If you start doing a positive or even like a 0 offset, there's probably going to be a pretty good chance that you're going to start rubbing that upper control arm, unless you do a super skinny, super narrow tire, or you add a spacer on top of that to get that offset negative and pushing that tire out. All right, so let's look at 4 contact points that we have to start to worry about when looking at going to a bigger tire. So the first one, I have an aftermarket bumper, but if you don't, you have to worry about rubbing on the front plastic portion here. We have to worry about rubbing on the upper fender. We also have to worry about rubbing on the upper control arm or anything else inside the wheel well, brakes, etc., whatever it is. And then the majority is going to be in the back here, so this back part of the wheel well, and then also the cab mount portion of the truck. So those are the 4 contact points that you really have to worry about. Once you start messing with the wheel size, the upper control arm, the lift, it's going to impact those each a little bit differently. So for example, if we're switching the upper control arm to something like an SPC upper control arm, you're moving that caster or the wheel forward, which is what a lot of people will end up doing, especially when it comes down to moving the wheel away from the body mount itself. You're gonna have to start worrying about rubbing or hitting this plastic portion up in the front. The other thing that you're gonna have to start worrying about is if you start going with a wider tire size, so something like a 295 or even like a 315 70/17, which is close to a 35-inch tire, you're going to have to start worrying about hitting the upper control arm of the lift, okay? Once you start going a bigger tire size overall, the overall diameter starts to increase. You're gonna have to start worrying about a lot of those 4 possible contact points inside of the wheel well. All right, so we know we have to worry about our 4 contact points. So front, upper control arm, top of the wheel well here, and then the back being this plastic and the cab mount. We also now have a good understanding of what caster means, and then also the offset. So let's dive into the 3 different setups that I've ran on this truck and what I've done to basically fit that setup or those setups on here. And the first one that I ever ran was a negative 12-degree offset. So again, pushing the wheel out. That was on a Rockstrick negative 12-degree offset wheel. And then a slightly larger tire than stock, which was a 265 70/17 Wild Peak AT3W at the time. And that was pretty easy to fit from forums, from online. I knew I was gonna rub slightly, and most of it was just actually on the back here. So just had to do a little bit of plastic trimming, nothing on the cab mount at that time. Worked like a dream. I did rub a little bit more when flexing, off-roading, whatever it is, but in town, it wasn't bad. It was only when I would like hit a dip while turning, so into a parking lot that is a little bit steeper, you're turning at full lock or driving out of the parking lot at full lock. That is when it would rub the most. And again, that was easily mitigated by just trimming some plastic. It's a little daunting at first, especially when the truck has less than 1,000 miles on it and you're already cutting stuff on it. But trust me, once you start making these first cuts, all the cuts following that are going to be much easier. So that was the very first setup. Worked fantastic. I ran that for quite a while, probably about 10 or 12,000 miles, which may not seem like a long time, but it was a long time. Ran that, and then we finally decided to jump up to a 33. And at that point as well, that was what I was doing the whole suspension upgrade, because doing the suspension upgrade, running that 265 70/17 would just look too small inside the wheel well. So at that point I decided to grab my big boy pants, grab my britches, and jump up to the famous 33-inch tire that everyone who has a 3rd gen Tacoma probably ultimately jumps to at some point in their truck build. Now doing that, I knew I was going to have a few more issues starting to fit that inside the wheel well area, okay? My major concern was going to be the cab mount chop, or the cab mount specifically on the 3rd gen Tacoma. And I did do a cab mount chop. I did the aggressive chop from running for Tacos at the time. And what they do is they get really aggressive on cutting the cab mount back, probably the most that you can before doing a full cab mount relocate. So they did that, and then they also did the pinch welds on this truck because that is also another area or possible rubbing point when starting to go up to a larger tire size. It's right inside the wheel well area. They basically cut those and then fold them back and hammer it down. Okay, so again, it cuts out another possible point where you will rub when flexing this truck or at full lock and flexing. Most likely you're going to hit or rub in that certain area. So that was done by Running for Tacos. And at that point, I had already done the Viper cut in the front because I wanted it for an aesthetic purpose. I probably would have rubbed also in the front as well, because with those SPC upper control arms that I have on there right now, I have them maxed out for caster. So again, that caster is pushing that wheel forward. And when you start going up into a 33-inch tire, adjusting that caster all the way forward to help with clearance from the body mount in the rear, there's a really good chance that you're possibly going to start rubbing on that plastic portion up front. Now, you probably don't have to do a Viper cut. I would say it really depends on the type of wheeling that you're going to do, also the suspension that you have on the truck. And sometimes you can get away with just heating up that plastic wheel liner inside, kind of molding it and just pushing it away from the wheel. Best thing you can do is basically jack the truck up or the upper control arm, and then you can move it and then adjust to see where you might potentially be rubbing inside the wheel well area. So what I did to personally fit the 33 is the 285 7017, which was a Wild Peak AT3W. I had the Dobinson's twin tube suspension lift, which equated to about 2 3/4, 3 inches of overall lift. I had the SPCs maxed out or roughly at about 3 degrees positive caster. So moving that upper control arm, moving that wheel forward. I also had the cab mount chop from Running for Tacos. And I also did the Viper cut. Viper cut is in the front to help with that plastic clearance in the front portion of the wheel well. And I had no rubbing. There is absolutely zero rubbing. There was no rubbing at full flex. If anything, at full flex, when I was like literally pushing up against the bump stop on the lower control arm, off-roading, I would maybe get a little bit of rubbing on the inside here, but nothing on the cab mount chop, the front plastic, or anything else like that. So that is how I personally fit 33s. If you don't do any off-roading, if you're not flexing the truck a lot, if you are the quote-unquote mall crawler, I have seen people fit 33s on stock suspension with some trimming. It's going to be quite a bit. But again, if you're not flexing the suspension, if you're not stuffing that wheel up inside the wheel well, you know, full lock, whatever it is, most likely you're going to have to do a lot less trimming versus if you are doing all of that, you're flexing it, full lock, whatever it is, it's going to just equate to the suspension, that wheel being put into places where a larger tire should not be going. So again, that's how I fit the 33s. And then the current tire and wheel size that I have on there is a 285 75 17. So that middle number is the only change from going from a 33 to a 34-inch tire. We are now running the Falcon Wild Peak RTs, which is kind of like a mixture or combo or hybrid between their all-terrain and mud-terrain tire. They definitely have a much more aggressive tread pattern and a sidewall look over the AT3W, or which is now the AT3 4W. And so far, they have been pretty darn good. In terms of performance, I would say they handle a little bit less superior on hard packed snow and ice compared to my old AT3Ws. But from dirt, mud, deep snow like powder and stuff, fantastic. They are an awesome overall tire. I think just for Montana, we have a lot of hard packed snow, a lot of ice, especially on the interstates, and in town it just gets, you know, driven over, it gets packed down, it melts, it freezes, turns to a sheet of ice. I have noticed a decreased performance with these over the AT3Ws, and probably in the future, especially knowing that the AT4Ws are now out I will most likely be switching to those when these are worn out or done from a lifespan perspective. The wheels are an incredible addition, and these are from my good friends over at SSW, recently known as, or formerly known as, Summit Off-Road. So they went through a little bit of a branding refresh. And funny enough, before they reached out to me and we worked together on getting these wheels on the truck, I had basically these identical or same wheels. I took a screenshot, and I'll toss it up on here. I took a screenshot of these wheels like a year before that, and it's pretty cool, pretty crazy to see that they reached out. We were able to do a little collaboration and work together, and here we are. So these are the Raptor -12 offsets, polished / brushed look. And the reason why I also went with these is the appeal and the look is phenomenal, all right? Most people almost always will do a black or a bronze style wheel. It's just super common. I mean, when you look at other companies to get wheels, like there are very few that actually have this polished look now. Most of them are just black, bronze, maybe another color, but the polished look is just, it's awesome, okay? And I know it would be a little bit of a wild approach, especially going from the traditional black, but once I threw them on the truck, I really hadn't seen any polished on a cement Tacoma yet, and I just think it looks fantastic. The other thing that I've noticed with these is the spokes actually don't collect or gather mud, and the wheels just almost always seem super clean, okay? I went through the Utah desert a couple weeks ago, a lot of red mud, a lot of dirt, and you know, just even going to the car wash real quick, like they spray off super easy. So that's awesome to see. Whereas my other ones, the Rocks Tricks, like I felt like those things were magnets for mud, and no matter what I did to wash them off, like they almost always were just full of mud and caked and collected. But again, they also had more spokes, so these have less, which again helps with keeping them clean. Helps preventing mud, dirt, and grime from getting locked up in there, and a true pain in the rear to spray off and also keep clean. Now, this is, again, a 34-inch tire, and that middle number is the only factor that changes from going from that 33, so a 285 70 17, to a 34-inch, which is a 285 75 17. So with the jump from the 33-inch tire to the 34-inch tire that I have now, ultimately I really didn't have to do really anything that I hadn't already done for a 33-inch tire, okay? So again, I already have the cab mount chop, the aggressive pinch welds done. Do I think you need that to fit a 34? Yes, I do, okay? I have the upper control arms already with caster, positive caster, so I'm pushing this tire already further forward to basically move it away from the body mount even more. And if I even go and stick my fingers in here, I have roughly about 2.5 fingers to fit inside of here before even hitting this plastic. If I'm looking at the body mount area, it's much more, okay? So it's not the body mount that I'm worried about anymore, it's more of the plastic. And that's going to lead to another discussion that we're gonna have in just a little bit. But it's more of the plastic that I am worried about, if anything, okay? And then obviously in the front, I have an aftermarket bumper. I don't have to worry about rubbing this plastic. I have a really good friend, Blake. He basically has he has the same tire size. His offset is a little bit more, so it's a little bit higher of a negative offset pushing that tire out. And he rubs just barely, again, at full flex, hard turning into parking lots, he'll rub just barely on that front plastic, and he has no viper cut, okay? He also has the SPCs maxed out for caster, so again, pushing that wheel forward as much as possible, pushing it away from the body mount area. Could he do a Viper cut and eliminate that, or even just mold some of the plastic? Sure, okay. So I think overall, if you have the clearance for a 33 already, you're not rubbing at all at full flex, turning into parking lots, whatever it may be, fitting the 34 is likely not going to result in any more additional work at that point. Now again, it's going to depend down to your suspension setup, offset of the wheel, because if you have that, neutral or zero offset, you're probably going to rub on the upper control arm, so you want to make sure that you have clearance there. Just think of those 4 points of contact that you have to worry about that I mentioned earlier in the video: the front, the upper control arm, the inner part of the wheel well here, and then the plastic portion, and then the cab mount in the very back as well. Okay, so we have recapped how I fit 34-inch tires on my Tacoma. To do a little recap on that too, of just my current setup, these are the SSW Raptors, negative 12-degree offset, so that's pushing that wheel out slightly, just a little bit. We are running the 285, 75, 17 Wild Peak RTs. This is an E-rated tire as well. And moving into the next portion, so what would it take to actually fit a true 35-inch tire on the Tacoma with how it sits now, and probably what I would actually have to end up doing? You hear a lot of people saying, oh, I can fit a 35-inch tire and I don't rub. That is BS, all right? Mountain Yodas did an amazing reel on this, and people come in, they have work done, and they're like, hey, I'm running a 35 and don't rub. Call BS, because if you start looking inside here, the people that actually wheel the truck and flex and are turned and flexing, they're rubbing a crap ton on that inner wheel well area, all right? So if you want to fit like a true 35 and wheel this truck off-road, what you actually have to end up doing for a lot of folks is, the first thing is doing a cab mount relocate. So basically cutting the cab mount out, relocating it further back. A lot of people, again, this is something that a lot of people don't do, but most people actually have to do a tub, which is essentially cutting out the portion inside this wheel well and pushing it back further. So you basically cut a hole inside the wheel well area there, kind of like where your feet go, basically putting a new piece of metal on there, hammering it out, because a lot of people rub back there. And then you're also probably gonna have to cut your fender, okay? So a lot of people will do like a high clearance cut here. You're basically cutting this plastic piece and then the metal behind it. So you're not, when you are at full tuck and turning, you're not hitting this plastic piece and completely demolishing not only your wheel, but the inside here, okay? Those are pretty much the 3 things that you're gonna have to do. You're gonna have to hammer, you're gonna have to cut, and you're gonna have to test fit a lot. And that is personally why I think this 34-inch tire is a phenomenal size before going full ludicrous mode and doing all of that, all right? Sure, you can slap a 35 on here. You can definitely wheel it, but it's not going to be an enjoyable experience, and you are going to tear the crap out of everything inside this wheel well by not doing it properly. The other thing that you have to worry about is if you are wheeling it fairly hard, it is putting a lot of additional stress on a lot of components inside. So your tie rods, the steering rack as well. Again, these trucks are not made to withstand a 35-inch tire for long periods of time and the abuse and wear and tear off-road. When you are slapping something that large over the stock tire size, something is bound to break at some point, okay? And if you're okay with that, if you're okay with, potentially burning your steering rack out, God knows who knows when, and potentially putting a lot more strain on your tie rods and just constantly replacing them, or going a beefier route, like perfect. All power to you, more power to you to do that. But for me, with my setup right now and just driving mostly on the highway with some off-roading, obviously, I think a 34-inch tire is a really good between going with a 33 and then again full ludicrous mode at a 35 inch tire. I just don't want the extra stress and then all of the additional modifications that come with trying to fit a 35-inch tire on these trucks, okay? Now with the 4th gens, it seems like Toyota really listened, and people are fitting a 35 and even a 37-inch tire on basically near stock suspension. So that is fantastic, but for 3rd gens, we have the short end of the stick, and we just kind of have to stick with this or go the route of cutting, modifying, and doing a lot of stuff to the truck in order to get those to fit. All right, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Again, this is just more of talking about my experience of fitting a larger tire and the steps that I did. I don't want this to be like an exact how-to video because there are so many different variables that come into play with if you're going to rub, how you can fit a larger tire, you know, the suspension, the type of wheeling, the type of driving that you're doing, like all of those are going to come into play when determining if you're going to rub, what you need to cut, and the modifications that need to be made. I will just say, like, jumping to a 33, expect to trim. Jumping to a 34, expect to trim and cut. And then if you ever decide to jump to a 35, expect to trim and cut a lot, okay? Huge thanks also to SSW. Obviously, this is a partnership and collaboration with them. They've been phenomenal. They're super fantastic over there. And like I said, I had been eyeing their wheels long before this, when they were once called Summit Off-Road, which you guys probably are familiar with. They've been around for a while. Again, they're just super cool, and they offer some very unique wheels that a lot of companies in the industry don't offer, all right? With that being said too, the suspension and lift will be changing on the truck in about 2 weeks. So we have developed a partnership as well with Dobinson's and then Sumo Springs / Super Springs, which you all might be familiar with. So we will be changing to the MRRs. Super stoked about that. I've been running the Dobinson's twin tube nitrocharge for damn close to 50K miles. It's been awesome, but I'm just ready for something with a little bit more adjustability. And we'll also be switching to the Dobinson's billet upper control arms that are going to have the ability to adjust. So caster, which is huge. So still being able to push that wheel forward. And they're just gonna look awesome with the SSW wheels. I went with the teal springs for the Dobinson's, so it should match the teal Max Tracks as well. Again, guys, it's gonna be awesome. I'm super stoked. Going to be working with a shop up in Kalispell, collaboration with them as well. So they're going to be doing the install. Going to be filming it. So how-to kind of video, walking you through what they do, installing that, and then installing the bump stops in the front and rear, which should be awesome. If you guys have any questions on the current setup, challenges that I faced from going from the stock tire size to, you know, that 265 7017, and then to the 285 7017, and then finally to the 285 7517, let me know. Probably one question that will be popular is, hey, what is your MPG like with this tire setup? It's not great, but it also varies a lot on, you know, the type of conditions that I'm driving in. So if it's very hilly, if it's up and down, the wind is another huge factor as well. So for most of the time, I just tell people it's anywhere between 10 and 15 miles per gallon. Right now it says 14. Driving back from Utah, I was straight into a headwind, doing well over 75, so probably about 80, 85. I was getting about 11 and a half, 10 and a half, okay? Absolute trash. This truck likes to be driven between like 60 and 65 on flat surfaces, all right? Once you start adding hills, once you start adding direct headwind, it just completely demolishes your MPG. So again, 10 to 15 MPG on average. That's not adjusting it for this tire size as well, because once you start adding a larger tire, the speedo and MPG and everything also gets out of whack. So for example, doing 60 in this truck, really I'm probably doing about 65 or 66 on average, all right? With that being said, again, any questions, comments, let me know your experience with fitting bigger tires, any issues that you struggled with or anything that you had to overcome, let me know down below. Make sure to leave a like, leave a comment and subscribe for future content, and see you guys in the next one.